Hello, this is Candace the Advocate coming to you today. It is Monday the 28th, and if you're not able to view this video, I will post it so that you can view it at a later date. But I just did some training on a disorder called DID, Dissociative Identity Order. And I took some notes on it because I'm still learning about it myself, but the things that I learned about it was so eye-opening for me and so important for me to know and to understand because not only am I an advocate, one who is responsible for sharing with victims their rights and their responsibilities and helping them to understand trauma and stress and how to navigate through that. But I also feel as a coach, it is my duty to be able to help someone through their trauma and their hurt. A person who wishes to employ the services of a coach rather than traditional methods of therapy, which I also recommend as well. One thing about coaching is slowly emerging as a non-traditional way to assist people with different issues, whether it's someone wanting to reach their goals or learn how to set goals or understand what their purpose is in life, someone who is going through a traumatic experience and needing someone to walk along with them on that path. A coach does that too. And it's not as recognized and it's not as credible as therapeutic services, but it is so important for that industry to understand that slowly emerging are alternative methods of non-traditional therapeutic healing mechanisms such as yoga, such as acupuncture, again, coaching, and meditation. That's also a good one as well. But let's get into DID and what DID is, dissociative identity order. Today I'm going to talk about what it is, what the impact of it is, and how, if you are a victim service provider, how will you strategize your services and your resources in order to meet the needs of those who need what you do at its fullest capacity? Okay, so dissociative identity disorder is a severe psychiatric condition strongly correlated with the history of chronic and unremitting childhood abuse, characterized by identity alteration and confusion. So let me break that down for you. Typically, as children, we experience some kind of traumatic experience or some type of violent behavior in the home or in the community to where we create this um, imaginative character that we retreat to, or this imaginative space and place that we retreat to because it keeps us safe. And we use that as a survival skill, or we use that as a coping mechanism in order to help us to not feel the sting of it, or to feel the brunt of it, or to go through the emotional feelings that it brings. I remember as a young girl growing up in Buffalo, New York, I may have been maybe around the age of 7 or 8, and there was a family in the neighborhood that we were friends with, 3 children, and they had parents, and they stayed on Laurel Avenue, and their house caught on fire. And to think about what it makes me think about now as an adult, how I felt back then as a child was not being able to see those kids, those friends anymore, and wondering what they must have felt, Were they screaming for help? Were they trying to get out of that house? And it was even traumatic for me to even recall that memory as a child. And so, what do you do with that when you're a kid? How do your parents talk to you about that to protect you from the emotions that awaken and arise because of something like that happening? Now, that didn't happen to me, but it happened to another family, but justifiably so. The effect and the emotionalism of that affected me. Now, there's another situation when I was a child that happened as well. There was a family of five children, and this may have been on Dodge or Southampton, where a woman killed all five of her children. And it was supposedly a satanic ritual of that nature. That's traumatizing as well, to as a child to try to wrap your mind and to wrap your head around someone like a parent or someone who's a guardian that's there to protect you, that's there uh, to take care of you, to nurture you, and to rear you into what your life's purpose is to be, to take your life, because in that way is very traumatizing. And so, these are just some examples, but there are many, many more examples that are very traumatic and evoke some type of emotional response that we tend to, as children, create an imaginary character or space to retreat to so that we suppress those feelings and those emotions, that we don't deal with them. And these imaginary places and these imaginary characters cause us to be different. We intend lose our identity, our original identity, because we use these coping skills in order to not deal with what's really going on underneath it all. So, when a child experiences ongoing trauma, again, we create a space in our mind. They create a space where they can go to escape it. A child should not be forced to create imaginary friends as a means of escaping abuse or trauma that's occurring inside of the home or outside of the homes. We create imaginary characters to play with or to um, for fun filled purposes, for imaginary purposes, not as purposes and means of escape, uh, so that we don't feel what we need to feel. And some of these signs can be identified from as early as 8 to 9 years old, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. Are you noticing they're creating a cognitive escape? Parents, are you noticing children are creating a cognitive escape? Spouses, do you notice if your spouse is creating or has created a cognitive space because they don't want to deal with certain issues that may arise in your marriage? When there is no really physical space to go to, when a person is unwilling to sit down and talk about what's really going on, but instead they will form this imaginary shield of protection, just to dismiss the entire situation or conversation. That's not good. That's something to look out for. In this training that I did today, it estimates that 1 to 3% of the US population struggles with DID, and I think it's more. And I say that because of all of the racial tensions and during COVID 19 that has happened is causing us to feel a certain kind of way about being isolated, about being fearful in losing your job or losing income. The anxiety, the level of anxiety is increasing. And there should be a normal level of calm in isolation and also in um, times of desperation that's different from the behaviors that we carry out that supersede the situation. That's when we know that we are struggling with anxiety. If your emotional behaviors way supersedes the what's actually going on, then that's an identifier of a person's struggling with anxiety. So again, anxiety defined is a feeling of worry, nervousness, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. COVID is definitely an uncertain outcome. We would have never thought at the beginning of 2020 that by the end of 2020, over 300,000 lives would have been lost due to an airborne virus. Increased anxiety affects and interferes with our daily life all day long. It does. You can't deny it. You can't sweep it under a rug. It must be talked about. It must be dealt with, even in around your small family circles. Children experience anxiety. We're talking about it here in DID, dissociative identity disorder. We don't want our children to retreat to a place of imaginative figures and spaces because they're unable to cope and deal with what's really going on. It is time for us to really get together with our families, get together with our loved ones, and talk about those things that are going on so that we don't lose who we are originally because we've created something else that we're trying to live up to that isn't really who we were designed to be. So let's define abuse because some of those DIDs disorder stem from abuse. And we all know that there are four different types of abuse. There's sexual abuse, there's physical abuse, there's emotional abuse, and there is sexual neglect. But for the purpose of this training or this information, I'm just going to talk a little bit about emotional abuse. So, abuse defined is cruel or violent treatment of people or animals. Basically, it's mistreatment, any type of abuse. Now, again, it can be physical, emotional, neglectful, or sexual. But we're going to talk about emotional abuse because I believe it happens way too much in the African American culture. Emotional abuse, and I'll start with the way we communicate. Um, Cursing for us, for some of us, is it comes second nature. A lot of times we do it so much we don't even realize number one, that we're doing it and we don't realize how wrong it is, how demeaning it is, how degrading it is, because it's so ingrained in our language and in our culture. But it hurts the character of our children when we yell, when we scream, when we swear at them. Because behind that comes the hitting and the slapping and the beating. I see it in the grocery store all of the time. I did it as a parent, not realizing how much damage I was doing to my younger nieces and nephews, to my son. And we had conversations about that later on in life. And from then I vowed to never allow another curse word to come to fall from my lips because it is extremely abusive. There is a virtue and there is a fruit of the spirit. God even knew that this is a problem for us. And I don't even think us as African Americans, but just as humans, this is a problem for us. Kindness is a virtue. Kindness is a fruit of the spirit. Kindness is the opposite of swearing. Kindness is the opposite of cursing, of yelling. A kind word will begin to heal and restore relationships, whether it's parental relationships, spousal relationships, BFFs, best friend males. A kind word goes a long way and can be the first step into curing some of these old ills that kill us as a society, that kills us as people culturally. Um, Emotional abuse can consist of mean, hurtful, hateful words, negativity, talking down about someone, gossiping and spreading false truths, intimidation, coercion, ridicule, harassment, isolation, and again, swearing and yelling. These are all forms of emotional abuse that we may be doing without even realizing how much damage we're doing in our relationships. Listen, if we're going to be stuck indoors with each other for another 3 months, 4 months, 1 month, let's start working on the way that we communicate with one another so that when we do come up out of this, we'll be more clear about what our purpose is. We'll be more clear about how to continue on a path of success. We'll be more clear about how we are to relate and have relationships with our neighbors and with our friends and people that we see passing by in traffic. Will be better at controlling our tempers and our emotions and our behaviors in traffic. Um, so again, I said defining what abuse is the first step in dealing with DID, dissociative identity disorder, and learning how to work through it. You know what? Let's make a pact. Let's make a promise to ourselves that we're going to learn how to work through those things that we have been um, enslaved to, those things that we've been held bound to, that keeps us from being our best selves. Um, I want to talk a little bit about, again, what happens whenever we create these imaginary characters and when we go to these imaginary places, how we slowly distance ourselves from who we are and from who we are to become. Um, we live in an age where being different is not respected, it's not celebrated, and it's not as liberating as we'd like it to be. Being different is looked down upon. If you're not like me, if you don't talk like me, if you don't look like me, then you're a threat to me. We are not to be a threat to each other. We're to celebrate diversity. We need to celebrate the differences that we have in each other, but we need to be true to ourselves as well. Okay. So for a person using an identity to escape the stress of trauma is where alteration and confusion sets in. Listen, again, it's okay when we're younger to create these imaginary characters as play friends and as a way to keep ourselves busy and occupied in a fun way to where we're done, we can go back to our true selves. But if we're creating these people, these figures to escape from something tragic, then we're always going to stay there and we're always going to remain there. And we're never going to really know who we are. We're never going to be happy with who we are. So we're going to create these identities that seem to keep us safe and protected, but we don't even know who we are. And then we expect the outside world to respect us and love us for who we are, but we don't even know who we are. Um, the alteration and the confusion sets in because we already feel less than. Because of something that has happened, we already feel less than. As a coach, I don't want you to feel less than. I want you to know who you are and I want you to celebrate who you are so that you can be who you are that leads you on a path of success so that you can live a successful life. Now, let's look at a person who is Black, gay, or trans, poor, or homeless. Now, that person with all of these different variables associated with him was caught stealing from a neighborhood store. Now, the authorities are called, the authority picks him up. Law enforcement is not trained, nor do they have time to discuss dissociative identity disorder with this person to understand number one, the deep effects of being Black, the deep effects of being trans, what it feels like to be poor, homeless, and why he's doing what he's doing. The police officer shows up, he broke the law, so he's going to jail. So there needs to be some reform, there needs to be some rehabilitation. Whose responsibility is that to do? Is it a therapist? Mainstream therapy is not designed to deal with that person either. There needs to be more non traditional, therapy centered coping skills and mechanisms to help people who struggle with dissociative identity disorder. What a coach does is it doesn't even deal with the trauma of being arrested. It doesn't deal with the trauma of being um, uh, whatever this current issue is. We go all the way back to understand, okay, so who are you? How were you designed? What do you love about yourself? What do you love about your eyes? What do you love about your facial features? What do you love about the way that you speak and talk and present yourselves in public? What do you like about your hands? What do you like about your body? We talk about those things. And when I tell you that when I'm in coaching sessions with people and I start my coaching sessions like that, I see people light up, they blush, they tend to not, they want to shrink back and not talk about the things that they love about themselves because no one has ever asked. And you know what? And we talk about this over and over and over again to kind of lessen the instances of hyper being hyper vigilant. I want my clients, I want my friends, whenever I'm working with someone and they become a client and I've seen them several times, we become friends. So much so that they trust me with their stuff. I trust them with my stuff. And we form this relationship to help them to deal with some of the things that they were never able to deal with before. And then we talk about what's going on currently, because it's easier to talk about what's going on currently when you have dealt with something that has happened in the past. That is why it is so important to allocate funding for non traditional therapeutic services to help marginalized individuals have a fighting chance of living out their purpose and becoming who they were destined and designed to be. We need to start taking dissociative identity disorder serious because it is real. We all struggle with it in some kind of way, some more so than others. And once we figure out a way to unlock the key, the path, the way from becoming enslaved, once we break those chains and become delivered from those things that have held us back, how much more of life will you be able to live once we come through this pandemic? Um, Again, what else do I want to say about that? I have so much on my notes, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. Um, Doctors are overworked and stressed and may not have the tools needed to address this emotional pain. A therapist may not be the wisest choice to reform this person. Specifically, again, therapy is mainstream, and most of the professionals in this profession doesn't look like us. We need more non-white professionals in therapy, as in positions of leadership, as coaches, as business owners. Um, and then once we do get more non white professionals in these positions, they need to learn and understand the impact and the effects of mental illness and mental wellness so that we can begin healing our communities, healing our families, healing our neighborhoods from the bottom up, from the inside out, so that we all can live more liberally and more comfortably and more in unity. Rich and deep communication is lacking. The opportunity to truly love yourself and others is missing. Early childhood abuse disallows us to live by the virtues which are intended to shape us to live from our truest self. I'm going to say that again. Early childhood abuse disallows us to live by the virtues that are intended to shape us to live to our truest form of self. You deserve to live your truest form of self. Find you a life coach that will help you do that. As a coach, I go there with you because it's not because of me. It's because I want you. I'm tired of seeing us suffer. I'm tired of suffering. So I want to do my part. I became a life coach to help so many of us who are stuck and can't seem to find a way up out of this rat race of emotion, this rat race of turmoil and emotionalism, of anxiety, stress, and depression. Um, it is important for you to be heard. It is important for you to be known. It is important for you to be delivered from all of that which has held you back long enough.